Yep. My sepsis story started on the 9th of December last year. I woke up in bed in the middle of the night with a really sharp pain in the right hand side of my rib cage and my lungs. Nothing that was too bad, but I just thought, oh, I turned over in bed, funny, and clicked something. And then over the next week or so, on the 15th of December, it developed into a cough and cold. And I'd actually got a job interview that day at work. And I went to the interview apologising for having developed this hacking cough and really hoping that I wouldn't pass anything on to them. On the Saturday night, I woke up again in the middle of the night having a really bad coughing fit, and this excruciating pain that sort of like ripped through my ribs. I've never had pain like it before. Managed to go back to sleep, but then early on the Sunday morning got up and went to the walk-in centre where they thought I'd got a blood clot on my lung, so they sent me to the Northern General Hospital. It was really busy. It was the week before Christmas. There were lots of cases of strep A. The A&E was absolutely rammed full of people. I spent 9 hours there and eventually saw a doctor, but got sent home as I tested positive with flu, and they thought I strained a muscle from all the coughing that I'd been doing. So I was sent home and asked to go back the following day to collect a prescription for Tamiflu, and sent home with cocodamol to help with the pain. On the Monday, I started vomiting thick green phlegm, not just coughing phlegm up, but actually vomiting it. And I thought, oh, no, that's not right. I must have developed a chest infection as well. But because the GP was closed at that time, I thought I'll ring them in the morning. Had a really rough night, up most of the night. My husband was up with me, coughing, etc. Managed to get through to the GP, and she prescribed me some antibiotics, which he picked up and brought home on his way home from work. And then must have been about 1:45 on that afternoon, I started to feel really breathless and I started to turn blue. So my husband rang 999 and the paramedics were with us in less than 10 minutes. And even though all my SATs were showing that my oxygen levels were right, etc., the paramedics sort of seemed to know that something wasn't quite right and said, we need to take her in. She was there on Sunday. We need to take her in. We need to do some more tests. So they took me in. And when they got there, it was chaos. There were ambulances. There were 10, 12 ambulances queuing outside. But one of them went into Resus and said, she needs to come in quickly. You need to make space. So they did get me in as quickly as they possibly could. And I started to deteriorate in Resus, where again my breathing was really bad. They put me on oxygen. I was coughing all sorts of horrible things up, and I started with really bad diarrhea. So later in the evening, after I'd been assessed and etc., they decided to transfer me to the infectious diseases unit at the Hallamshire, and within an hour of being there, they'd started me on antibiotics and fluids and pain relief, as well as the oxygen. And they also started me on nebulizing meds because I'd got an awful lot of horrible stuff that was still on my chest. I remember feeling I'd never felt so ill in all my life. I just thought, this is just not right. And as you know, quite often people describe the feeling of feeling like they're going to die when they start with sepsis. It did truly feel like that's what was going to happen, but I didn't know at that time that it was sepsis. I still thought it was just a chest infection. My husband had gone with me to the hospital, but he couldn't come with me to the infectious diseases unit. So through the night, I continued to deteriorate. I was passing horrendous bowel motions, etc. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, one of the doctors suggested that we should ring my husband and get him in. It might help me keep me calm, because I was having panic attacks. I was struggling to breathe and feeling quite disorientated with everything. So my husband came in and was up there with me through into the afternoon of like the following day, and we both remember there were about 8 doctors throughout that time that had come to see me, some of whom which were from the critical care unit. And it was at that point we were told that I'd got septic pneumonia and that I'd gone into septic shock as my organs had been struggling for oxygen. And they were particularly worried about my kidneys and my liver because my blood pressure had plummeted. So they kept they didn't actually admit me to intensive care at that point, but I was very much on their radar. And over the course of the next few days, my blood pressure stabilised, and I remained on the infectious diseases unit. I was also one of the things that I was really struggling to get my head around that was happening to me was I had the most horrendous hallucinations. Some we thought was related to some of the medications that they'd given me. Quite obviously, a lot, some of it could have been related to the sepsis and the infection that I was fighting. At one point, I'd actually got my mum, my dad, and my brother sat round my bed talking to me, which really freaked me out because they've all been dead a long time. So it's quite traumatizing that I could see them. And I was hearing all sorts of different voices, music playing that wasn't playing. It was just really, really awful. And then on Christmas Day, my breathing started to get worse again. And the pain in my lungs and ribs, again, was just horrendous. But it seemed more intense than when I'd had it previously in the week. Kept seeing different doctors every day, etc. And I think because of being in hospital over the Christmas period, there were just not the number of doctors in hospital that perhaps had the experience of sepsis, etc. So I felt like I went a little bit off the radar. And eventually, after 6 days, they sent me for a CT scan and X-rays, which showed that I got bilateral pleural effusions in my lungs, and that was why I was struggling to breathe. And they kept saying to me, "All your SATs are showing okay, your oxygen levels are fine." And I kept saying, "They might be fine, but I don't feel fine. I feel like somebody sat on my chest and crushing me." And clearly there was a reason for it. So once they realised that that's what had happened, they then transferred me back to the Northern General Hospital for me to have a lung drain fitted into my back and into my lungs to start draining the fluid from it. And I felt immediate relief. That evening, they drained a litre of fluid immediately that evening. So just the level of fluid in my lungs was horrendous. I remained in hospital for a further 2 weeks, and through that 2-week period, they managed to drain 4 litres of fluid from my lung, but the infection wasn't clearing. My infection levels got to a certain point and then just stopped, and no matter what they were doing antibiotic wise or anything, they couldn't shift it any further. So when they did a further CT scan, it showed that I developed what's called an empyema in my lungs, which is where the infection becomes pus-like and solidified in places. So it won't drain out of a drain because it's too thick. And they were also concerned that my heart had been affected as it wasn't beating right. But thankfully, when they did further tests on my heart, that was okay. But I did need to have major lung surgery to remove the infection. At first, they thought they were going to do it via keyhole. But when I went for my operation on the 13th of January, Yeah, I'm that lucky. It was Friday the 13th of January, and I thought, I can't believe this. What timing, but it is what it is. The thoracic surgeon said when they tried to go in with the camera to do it via like a video assisted technique, they couldn't get the camera through the infection. It was too thick. And when they came to, so they had to open up. I've got a scar on my back about 12 inch. And so they had to open, like physically open my rib cage up to get into my lung, and they removed the solidified infection, but they ended up removing about 10 large pieces of infection from my lungs. And he said it was like peeling an orange. That was the description he used. After that, I ended up having a blood transfusion, and I was kept intubated for the first 24 hours to help my lungs recover, and then spent 6 days in the intensive care unit, which, having never been in intensive care before, and even though I was really quite poorly myself, part of what was traumatic was the other really poorly people that were around me. And on a few occasions when other people, where they'd gone into cardiac arrest and they had to, message for the crash team, etc. It was just a horrible experience to see other people going through really traumatic things, and whilst trying to recover. So eventually, after 6 days, they moved me back onto the thoracic ward, and I spent the last 5 days of my hospital stay there, and came home on the 24th of January after 5 weeks in hospital. And I've never been so relieved to get home to my own bed, to have a good sleep. And I think I just literally just stayed there for, oh gosh, the best part of the next 24 hours, just sleeping. So yeah, that's my sepsis story up to the point of discharge. But as we know from many people, it doesn't end there. It's the ongoing recovery that's the challenge and the hard part as well. Wasn't discharged with anything. I didn't know about the UK Sepsis Trust. I was made to feel like by the hospital physios that I should be doing more each day in terms of exercise, getting up, moving about. I should set myself little goals, etc. Which is all well and good, but when your body's had the trauma that I'd had, actually just even getting up and going to the toilet or having a shower was just horrendous, and just took me all day to basically do small things like that, and with the help of my husband. And it was only when I got home and I realised I knew someone else that had been through sepsis through a friend of a friend. And it was her that sort of like that had been posting things from the UK Sepsis Trust. And I thought, that's probably where I need to start looking for information. And it was probably about 2.5 weeks later, after I've been discharged, I went back for a hospital follow-up appointment to see how the infection was clearing, and if my lungs were clear, how my scar was, how my wound was healing. And it was, but I was really still quite poorly at that point. I'd really been struggling with vomiting, with nausea, diarrhea. And they weren't sure whether they were going to readmit me, because they weren't sure if I was dehydrated. But eventually they put it down to me also having picked up norovirus, just for good measure. So I didn't get readmitted, thankfully, but it was that weekend that I then reached out to the Sepsis Trust and joined the group. And then once I was able to once I was admitted to the group and I could see all these posts, it all sort of started to make sense to me. And I reached out to one of the sepsis nurses to have a chat with them, which it was fantastic. I spoke with Emma. She was really supportive. She was really understanding. She suggested that when I had an appointment with my GP next, that I give him the information about the UK Sepsis Trust, etc. And then just to see what, once he'd got that information, what further support he could provide to me going forward. So that was a game changer for me in terms of my recovery. And then I sort of like stopped beating myself up as well, that I wasn't meeting these little goals that physios had expect me to. So I realised that other people who've got the lived experience were right. It's going to take time. You just need to be kind to yourself and stop expecting too much. And then I arranged for my GP to come and see me the week that I joined the Sepsis Trust. And again, he'd looked on the website, looked at all the information, and even though he'd not got a great deal of experience of sepsis, he'd obviously made himself really familiar before he came to visit me at home, and was really empathetic and understanding, and I guess validated how I was feeling. So I can't fault my GP's care. He kept in touch with me every 2 weeks. And just made sure that I've been fit to return to work, etc. But yeah, as I said earlier, if one thing I can get from this is that hospitals do start to give out more information about sepsis to people that have been affected, even if it's just a leaflet or a card to link them to the Sepsis Trust, it would make a huge difference to a lot of people. My employer and my manager in particular has been fantastic, been really understanding. At first, when I went into hospital, she was actually away in New Zealand for a month. So I messaged her to say, I'm in hospital. I've let your manager know. Well, I haven't. My husband has, because I can't speak. I couldn't at that point. And she was so shocked. And then when she returned to the UK, and my husband Mark spoke to her, she was absolutely stunned at just what had started off as a cough and a cold and how it had escalated. But she's been incredibly supportive. We kept in regular contact. Any support that I've needed, she's been happy to provide. As I say, I had a fairly lengthy phase return to work, and I'm working from home the vast majority of the time now, although I will be going into the office 1 or 2 days a week eventually. But I'm hoping to get some funding via Access to Work to help with that, so that I can get taxis to work to my office rather than having to rely on public transport. So I'm just waiting to see if that will go through. But yeah, just the fact that my manager's been really understanding of what a traumatic time that it's been, and that every day is going to be different. And like working from home enables me to, if I need to have a nap at lunchtime, for example, just to try and boost my energy levels a bit. So it makes a huge difference if you've got an employer that understands and is empathetic to what you've gone through and what you'll continue to go through as well. Make yourself aware of the symptoms, but also be aware that just because they're the symptoms that are listed, there might be other things as well that might cause you to have concerns that it's sepsis. And never be afraid to challenge anyone in the medical profession. If you've got a gut feeling that something really isn't right, then challenge them. Because with hindsight, what I should have done when I was in A&E on the Sunday evening is said, I'm too poorly to send home. I really feel this is more than just flu. And because I couldn't have my husband with me in A&E, I hadn't got anybody to advocate for me. So when you're poorly, you don't always advocate for yourself in the best way possible, do you? But and I'm not saying they misdiagnosed me, but I think had I been admitted that evening, perhaps things might not have escalated as much as what they did. We'll never know. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, but I guess it's the message, the strapline of the Sepsis Trust, isn't it? Just ask, could it be sepsis? And the number of times I've posted on my own Facebook page about it and posted threads from the group, and I've said, just ask the question. It could save your life or a loved one's life. And if it saves one person, then it's had the desired effect for me. Initially, it was really affected, particularly the time I spent in hospital as well, because it just seemed to go on forever. And I kept thinking, oh, I'll only be here a few more days. And that turned to a week, that turned to 2. And then before I knew it, it was 5 weeks. And when I came home, because I was really quite frustrated with what I couldn't do, that was affecting my mental health. And I felt so debilitated by it, mentally and physically. I felt bad for the impact it was having on my husband, because he was having to do everything, and he took time off work unpaid to care for me. Just help me get bathed, cooking me all the meals, doing all the housework, just everything that I couldn't do. And I don't think, other than going to the hospital, I didn't leave the house for about the first 2.5 months, because I just hadn't physically got the energy to get dressed and go out and socialise with people. And I didn't have visitors to the house either, because I was so paranoid about getting another infection, and there was still COVID going around. So yeah, it did impact on my mental health a lot. And even though my friends were really supportive, they kept messaging, they'd ring me or they'd Teams me, etc. Just not actually seeing people face to face was really hard. But I just thought, still through the winter period, I can't, my immune system's shot. I'm going to pick something. And I was terrified, and I still am terrified, or I will be when it gets to the winter period, of picking anything up again that might land me back in hospital with a serious infection. Because I still can't get my head round actually what happened and what the end result was. It was just, I look back and think, it was like a dream. But certainly making plans to go back to work helped me as I started to get physically stronger. Actually planning to go back to work did my mental health a lot of good. And I just started off with, I think the first week I only did 4 hours, 2 hours on 2 days, but just feeling like I was back in work and I was starting to come out the other end made a huge difference to my mental health. And I'd set myself a target that on the 10th of June, myself and 5 of my friends had booked to go and see Pink in Sunderland. And I set that as my target, that I was going. And when we had a catch up with them, they said, you're going. Even if we have to carry you there, you are going. And I said, I will be there. I'm not missing it for the world. And I made it. And it was the most amazing weekend with the girls possible. And I'm so proud of myself that I managed to get there. But my God, I paid for it the week after from fatigue. But it was worth it. It was worth. But I think just having that goal is what kept me going, thinking, well, I've got to get back to work before I do that. And just bit by bit by bit, life's gradually returned back to normal.